Amen.
Uh, okay, Pastor, because we're starting the book of Romans today, and I would like to know why do we need to study Romans?
Okay, excellent question. Romans, I believe, is the commentary, exhaustive commentary of the gospel. When I say the gospel, the birth, life, teaching, ministry, death, resurrection, glorification of Jesus Christ.
Um, Pastor, can you give us a historical background why the book of Romans was written?
All right. I'd like to connect this, of course, with our study on justification. Jesus Christ, my justification. As you might already know that when you discuss about righteousness or justification, you come to the book of Romans. So Romans actually, before we go into the text itself, I'd like to share with you a bit of background, not just of the book, but of the man himself, the man behind the book of Romans. Of course, the author was simply highlighting his topic, his subject. The center of his argument is no other than Jesus Christ. But who is Paul? Um, Paul, to begin with, was not originally an apostle. That means he was not included in the 12 apostles whom Jesus chose and picked along the way. Um, but he referred himself to be an apostle. Actually, his conversion, going to Damascus is the modern day Syria. It was believed to be so by scholars around 4 to 7 years after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So he became a follower, a Christian for that matter, and accepted the call to be an apostle around 37 to 40 Christian era. Like I said, 4 to 7 years. Around that period after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He was called Saul. Okay. Saul was a Jewish name because he was Jewish. But at the same time, you know that he was a Roman citizen. So his Romanized name is Paul. So he uses Saul to address the or to mingle, to minister to the Jews. But he uses Paul, the name Paul, for the Gentiles. And that's his concentration in the ministry, simply because his master Jesus Christ told him. So you focus on the Gentiles, on the outside world, in their context. And so, who became Paul ended his ministry with martyrdom, like many of the apostles. He was believed to be beheaded during the time of Nero, 67 CE. Why beheading? Because that fits a Roman citizen. Okay, so it was, although it was execution, but they termed that as respectful execution for a Roman citizen. Um, who was Paul? Before becoming Paul, while he was Saul, he was actually a learned man. He was a scholar from the tutorage or the under the class of Gamaliel, the famous, the prominent scholar, Hebrew scholar during his time. And so was amongst the members of the Sanhedrin. What's the Sanhedrin? That's the highest council in Judaism. So you have the Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, all those different factions. And the highest council is called Sanhedrin. He was part of that. And he'd been commissioned to suppress the budding group of the followers of Jesus Christ, this impostor for them, uh, introducing himself as the Messiah. So they should put an end to this growing menace problem of during their time in their place. And Saul was the one giving authority to persecute the Christians. So to jail them, and if they insist with their ways, to execute them as well. The turning point was when he was about to persecute Christians in Damascus, along the way, that Damascus road, so to speak. He was called by Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ personally introduced himself. Why are you persecuting me? For those who don't know the story, he was blinded, and after 3 days, that was his rebirth, and he was baptized to be a Christian. So Paul's personality was kind of a mixed bag. He was always, people around him were always suspicious. Is he really a Christian, or he's a spy for the Sanhedrin? Is he really true? Is he real as an apostle, or he's just using the church for his personal gain, for exploitation, or perhaps he's simply a madman? So many controversies around his ministry while doing his missionary journeys. That's why if you read his Pauline epistles are his letters to the churches in Asia Minor. Where's that? Around southern Turkey, and then going to Greece, going to Macedon. You have there along the Mediterranean coast. So he was always trying to introduce himself as if he's almost to the point of being apologetic that he is indeed real. He's not an imposter. He's really called by Jesus Christ. So poor man, because he needs to justify himself for leading the Christian church and for ministering to the Gentiles. Now let's go to the book of Romans itself. It was written about 57 CE, so almost 20 years after his conversion, I would say. This is about the growing Christian church in Rome, the center of the Roman Empire. Now, why do we have this tension between Christian Jews and Gentile Jews? It was because during the time of Emperor Claudius, all right, he deported the Jews from Rome. He didn't want any Jews in Rome. They were the scum of society. They're troublemakers. They're so mystified, full of controversies. But after 5 years, when Claudius ended his reign, the Jews came back. And so are the Christian Jews. When they came back, what they found out that the Christian church in Rome is mostly composed of, what do you expect? Gentile Jews, of course, because they were deported. So you see that tension. Before there were just Christian Jews. Now you have a mixed bag, Christian Jews and then Gentile Jews. Now they're clashing upon another in terms of the church polity and what's that? What to believe, what to practice, how to go about with their church services and their ministry. So the point of contention is, of course, the Gentile Christians, they have nothing to do simply because it's not part of their tradition, culture with the Jewish traditions. Remember, I mentioned before the Tanakh, the Torah, which is the five books, uh, the Old Testament, Genesis to Deuteronomy, and then the Nabim, the books of the prophets, where you have the major and minor prophets, and then the Ketuvim, the traditions, or they call it Talmud. So should they still uphold these things inside a Christian church? Well, of course, the Gentile Christians, they oppose to it. And the Jewish Christians, they insist. So you see the divide in that growing church. That was the pastoral issue during Paul's time. And what he wanted by writing the book of Romans is to unify the church, because it's being split by this issue. And not just to unify them, but for them to embrace that the church now is multi-ethnic. It doesn't have to be purely Jewish or purely Gentile. What's purely Gentile, by the way? It's multi-ethnic already, isn't it? You have the Greeks, of course, Romans, and other parts of the then known world. And what unifies Christians, according to Paul, is the gospel. The gospel in Jesus Christ.
Pastor, one question for you before we start the verses in Romans. What is this significance of studying Romans in our time?
Okay. You know what? What's really astounding and not really surprising, the pastoral issues during Paul's time can be seen in our time as well. It's not just confined to the Adventist Church. I did my PhD in an ecumenical institution. So I got a bit of background. That happens to the Anglican as well. They're split in many different issues. You have high Anglican, low Anglican. Even in the Orthodox Church, they have many patriarchate. And of course, in the Protestant evangelical, you have there many issues dividing the church. Again, we should go back to the theme of Romans. What's that? Unity. And who's going to unite us? The gospel in Jesus Christ.
Okay, Pastor, thank you so much for giving us the background in Romans. Shall we start reading the verse? Before that, is there any structure of how the Romans was written, Pastor?
Okay. There are different suggestions, but first I'd like to make a disclaimer. The Bible originally, in its form, was without chapters. Okay, the chapters was just a previous later invention, I would say, to help the readers navigate through the scriptures. So I can't really be dogmatic about that. The book of Romans is divided into chapters 1 to 4, and then 5 to 8, and then 9 to 11, and then 12 to 16. That could be a suggestion. But I would say, being a systematic theologian, because I've been trained to see the cathedral of thought, to look for themes and its relevance, and to see the bigger picture. Of course, we're going to start off with the gospel, like what we pointed out before, that the summary of Romans seems to be, remember that, Ivan, is in 1:16 and 17, which we'll be discussing later. So from there, we can have the bird's eye view, so to speak, of what Paul was trying to say to get the message across in the book of Romans. So you have there, I already mentioned those. First part is about humanity. Okay, remember the dichotomy? Where's my illustration again? Okay. humanity, the divine and human. So he starts off with humanity, who we are, and then he goes to divinity and centers on Jesus Christ being divine and human. All right, that's around chapters 5 to 8, and then it's more on the divinity side because he deals with election per se, especially in the pre-temporal. Remember that God's pre-temporal plan before creation. That's in oh 9 to 11, and he goes back to humanity. That's in 12 to 16. Now that we've been saved, now that we've been justified in Jesus Christ, how do we live our lives? So you have there the pragmatic aspect of the gospel.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Shall we start reading verse 1 of Romans chapter 1, Pastor?
Yeah, you read, please. I believe you're gonna be
Yeah. Okay.
sharing the screen as well.
Uh,
That's good.
Romans chapter 1, verse 1. Paul,
Mm.
a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God, which he
Okay,
promised.
let's post that first. um, because we're gonna take this slowly but surely. Exposition again, spotlighting on justification in Jesus Christ. So Paul, he's now using his Roman name because he's in Rome. Okay, a servant of Jesus Christ. Actually, in the original, uh, that
Slave.
slave, yeah, it's not just doulos. It's really a slave of Jesus Christ. You see there the transition from being a persecutor of Jesus Christ. He's now not just a servant, is fully committed, submitted his life and everything to Jesus Christ as a slave. What's the difference between a slave and a servant? Again, in Roman context, the servant doesn't have to be stay in a Roman house, of course, doing household chores. Okay, that's paid, of course. But a slave is in house and not necessarily being paid for because you could be a prisoner of war or you've been bought from the trade market. So you're a stay in and you're part of the family. That's how Paul considers himself to be part of the family of Jesus Christ. Called to be an apostle again. ah, I can't see in the Gospels that, for instance, Matthew refers to himself as an apostle and every now and then trying to emphasize that he is indeed an apostle. It's just Paul doing that in all his epistles. Again, trying to convince his readers that he is not an imposter. He is legit. He is really called by Jesus Christ himself. That's why we have the uh, set apart. You have there the word sanctification, actually, or being holy, set apart for the gospel of God. Continue, please.
Which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning Son Jesus Christ our Lord, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. Through him we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith among all nations, for his name, among whom you are all also are the called of Jesus Christ. To
Okay,
all,
let's stop there for now. Um, so verse 2, what's that promise? Promise in the Old Testament. Um, I did a book on the book of Isaiah, and I think the promise there was really in a nutshell. It's encapsulated, which refers back to Genesis 3:15. Remember the seed, okay? And who is that seed? The son in verse 3. When you read Holy Scriptures here in verse 2, uh, it should come to mind that he's speaking about the Ketuvim, sorry, the Tanakh, the Torah, Nabim, and the Ketuvim. So without the New Testament, let's be clear about that.